Hi, I'm Paul. Welcome back to another C# practical funkiness video, this time using the function match to create a powerful result type. A result type allows a method to return either a success or failure, offering a structured alternative to exceptions by treating failures as predictable outcomes instead of disruptive events. For the failures, we will use a failure base abstract class as shown on screen, with a couple of specific failure types just to demonstrate the principle. Because all our failures inherit from failure base, the result type can handle any type of failure in a consistent and strongly typed way. I use this approach in my production apps using my result type called flow. You can see my current set of failure classes by following the link in the comments, also in the video description below. Let's see our result type, or as we can now say, our result monad, now we know the functional lingo. That's assuming you watched the previous videos. As mentioned in other videos, I have used a result type for many years now and have tried different implementations. I have found this design to be the most practical, succinct and flexible. Unlike the last video, where we created a simple monadic container that had its inner value exposed via a public property, our result type has private properties for both its success and failure values. By hiding its internal state and exposing only the match method to access this state, a result type forces developers to acknowledge and handle both success and potential failure cases, which in my opinion results in more robust and error-free applications. We've covered map and bind in the previous videos, so excluding the use of the implicit operators that automatically wrap success or failure values in a result, we'll focus on match. I have included two versions of match, the standard version that outputs a value based on success or failure, and a void method to peek at or perform side effects without modifying the result. We will make use of this void match in an extension method, which we'll call it, followed by passing the unmodified result along, creating a tap-like method as shown in a prior video. The value returning match method requires two functions, one to be executed if the result is a failure and the other if it's a success. While it might seem unusual to use functions in this way, it's actually quite powerful. In many cases, your success function will simply pass the success value along, typically using the current type. However, these functions can also transform the result into a different type when needed. For the failure case, since the return type is the same as it is for success, it forces you to provide a default value or take an alternative action. This ensures that failure is handled explicitly without falling into the trap of using try-catch blocks as is discussed in a previous video. This approach keeps your error handling clean, predictable and functional. The void match just executes the provided action dependent on the current result state, success or failure. For demonstration, I have only added the sync versions, but in production you would have both sync and async. Okay, let's see a really simple demo using match before creating some extensions and then demonstrating the result type. First, we create a success and failure result simply by using the implicit operators added to the result type. Then, for both results, we call the void returning match method using lambdas to console writeline either the failure message or the success value. Finally, we use the value returning match method providing lambdas that return a value of 10 if the result is a failure, or the current value if it was successful. At the end, the default value is printed if the result was a failure, or the success value if the operation was successful. Let's run the app to ensure that our expectations are met. The output is as expected. To make the result type more user-friendly and give it a DSL-like feel, I prefer to keep the result class minimal and enhance it through extensions. There are many possible combinations, especially when considering different method names for various situations or creating both synchronous and asynchronous versions. The methods provided here are simply intended to give you an idea of the approach that I take. Let's move on to the result demo. On line 13, we start the processing pipeline by attempting to retrieve the file for processing. Since this could potentially fail, we add an on-failure handler to attempt an alternative file path if the first one fails. If the file retrieval is successful, we proceed to process the file. However, since the JSON processing could throw an exception, we use the onSuccessTry extension to wrap this method in a try-catch block, passing in a global exception handler specifically for JSON-related issues. Assuming the file is processed successfully, it returns a registration object. We then project this into a registration email object. Once we have the registration email object, we then extract the email address and send the email. Before concluding the pipeline, we add an on-failure handler to log any failure that occurs. Finally, we use the finally extension, which wraps the match method to provide the final output value based on whether the result was successful or a failure. Let's run it and take a look at the output. Given that I didn't log every step, it might not seem too impressive, but the process is what matters. I really hope that you take a moment to think about the steps involved and how little code is required in our pipeline to handle failures at any point. If you haven't worked with or seen a result type before, I highly recommend downloading the source code and experimenting with it. For those of you who are already familiar with this, there are more advanced use cases in my flow.core demo, which is the result type that I use in my production apps. The link to that repository is in the video description below. I believe that's enough to digest for today, so I'll wrap things up here. If you have any comments, whether good or bad, feel free to leave them and I'll do my best to answer any questions that you raise. Until next time, bye for now.